That distinguishes education from indoctrination. Indoctrination is stopping at this how and why. I'm going to give you some information and we're going to get to here, brilliant, and now we're going to stop. Don't question it, don't challenge it, don't break this down. No, this is what happens every time, don't question it. That's indoctrination. Education is going, here is something, here is how they connect, but now let's challenge it, let's break it down. Does it always happen? Is it always going to happen that way? G'day teacher geeks. In this video, I want to share a big revelation I had that helped me figure out why kids just weren't getting it in my class. Talk about 3 problems, and then I'll explain 3 things that I've done to help and why it helps them. One thing I realized, I was drowning kids in what I call building blocks. The building blocks are the individual bits of information we need students to know. So think about it in your course. In English, for example, it could be if you're studying poetry, parts of speech. In maths, it could be terminology and formulas. Science, it might be parts of a diagram, an anatomy of a plant. Whatever it is, there are specific bits of information we need our students to know. This is what I call building blocks. Now, all this is based on the solo taxonomy, which I've somewhat revamped in this model, which I'll explain. But where I was going wrong was I was drowning students in building blocks. See, every year I taught the course, I was getting more confident, my knowledge base was increasing, and I would pick up new things along the way, and it would connect to my knowledge base and what I knew, and I would share it with the students in class, but I didn't realize I was just inadvertently drowning them, smothering them in all this new information. And so it was only really when I dialed it back, when I tried to really put precisely in every lesson, what are the most important building blocks I need these students to learn, that I really see every student starting to improve in psychology. And so that was the first place I was going wrong. I was giving them too many building blocks, and often it was too fast. Now, we know just reciting and recalling individual facts and bits of information, what is this? What is this? That's a very basic level of knowledge. This is why I would call this the first level of learning. Just being able to recite basic facts and terms. So what we have to do is get students to see the connections, be able to do some analysis, some explanation, some application, to see how these things connect. Now, how we do that is asking better questions. So once I could figure out what are the building blocks I need in every lesson, then I could construct more meaningful questions. Also, I changed from giving them prompts, explain, describe, outline, discuss, to questions. What is, how does, how and why is. And suddenly that was so much more inviting. So once I could figure out my building blocks, then I could ask better questions, which would lead them to be able to make connections between these blocks. Another thing I realized that I was going wrong, so if the second level is understanding application, the deepest level of learning is the critical thinking, what I would call critical and creative thinking. And this is where my model of learning deviates from Biggs and Collis's solo taxonomy, and that they say that critical thinking is what they call extended abstract. I would say critical thinking is any critical analysis, a reflection on this relationship. Does this always lead to this? Does this always solve this problem? What happens after? What came before? Does this thing even exist? So first we go, okay, what is, how do these things relate? And then you question that relationship. That's critical thinking. The creative thinking is you take that relationship and apply it there goes my chalk, and apply it in a new context. So what I was doing wrong was I was asking these deep, analytical, abstract, evaluative, critical thinking type questions, and I wanted students to get to that deep level without first laying the foundation of the building blocks. And that's where everything changed for me. When I started focusing on, we'll get these foundations, we'll get the building blocks, then we'll put them together, then we'll get to the deep critical thinking. Suddenly, I had a whole lot more confidence in my class. I felt like every student would learn, and it made the world of difference. So what are some things I did to help specifically? First of all, I would give students a list before every unit, and at the end of the unit, these are the specific building blocks you need. A list of key terminology. What is? Very straightforward questions. And I would select them very carefully, the most important ones, because it's very easy to inundate, to overload students with too much information. So giving students a list, here's exactly what I want you to know by the end of the unit, is really helpful. I've got a video on key terms, traffic lights. That's one way I do that. The second thing I tried to do is figure out really carefully, are these the best building blocks? So often if I had a question like, what is something? If that concept was too abstract, too difficult to comprehend, I would get rid of it. For example, when I was teaching English, what are connotations? Okay, that's easy for me to explain, but what about my second language learners? And then to analyze connotation and how connotation affects meaning in informational texts, that's really hard to comprehend. So I got rid of connotation and I focused on something else. I would focus on a building block that was a little more concrete, but would still allow all students to have some analysis. And then maybe connotations is something I would use in as extension, but not for every student. And the third thing I did was I structured my assessments based on these 3 levels. So I made sure that all students could answer these simple what are questions. What is building block? Just know what they are. That was reflected in my assessments because it's really important that we build student confidence. And also, if you know what things are, brilliant. And that brings me to another really important point. Not every student is going to get to all 3 levels in my lesson, and I'm okay with that. If a student comes into my class, they don't know what these things are, and just by the end of the lesson, one student they just remember one of these things. I didn't know what tone meant. Now I do. Brilliant. Now, every other student in the class might have got deeper. That's okay. I'm okay with that. They learned something that's brilliant. And that building block, right, that lays a foundation for something else that might come in the next lesson. And if I plan my unit carefully, all that learning is going to build on and on and on. So it's okay that we don't get every student to every depth of learning. But what's important, and I would argue this, and this is why I'm putting it in this video, I want people to challenge it, you have to start with the building blocks. A lot of people in education want to start with these abstract critical thinking. We've got to get to the critical thinking, and they skip the content. Content is king. If you don't know, you can't think. And so we have to be very carefully selecting what is it I want you to know, what do I want you to do with it, and then the next step go, right, and let's break that down. And that's the extended critical thinking. That distinguishes education from indoctrination. Indoctrination is stopping at this how and why. I'm going to give you some information and we're going to get to here, brilliant, and now we're going to stop. Don't question it, don't challenge it, don't break this down. No, this is what happens every time, don't question it. That's indoctrination. Education is going, here is something, here is how they connect, but now let's challenge it, let's break it down. Does it always happen? Is it always going to happen that way? Right? And you can see I get animated, I get excited about this stuff, but that's a great simple way, and I wanted to make a whole nother video on this, education versus indoctrination, especially in today's day and age. It's pretty important to know the difference. I often question myself on this. I teach things that I'm passionate about, that I want these students to learn. I'm a gardener planting seeds that I hope one day will take root, but I have to be very careful that I'm not going to indoctrinate them into my beliefs and my values, and I'm not just passing them down. And how do I do that? I use these 3 levels, and I always encourage students to challenge it, and I have to be open to it, even if I disagree with the challenge. I have to be open to that. For example, I was teaching prison, and we teach, okay, is prison really that good for the brain? I would say no, solitary confinement's a terrible idea. Right? We have to rehabilitate. Why are we taking these prisoners that have damage to their brain and put them in an environment that's going to make that damage worse, and then say, now don't do that thing before that you did because of your brain damage that we've now made worse? Preposterous. But I can't stop there. I have to invite the challenge. And so the very next thing I do is I show them a video of a man confronting the guy who killed his son in the courtroom, wanting justice. So we introduce the idea of justice, because it's not just about rehabilitation. I can't watch that video without getting teary. I can't even think about that video without getting teary. And that's it. That's the key. So there is where I have to control myself about directing students down the path that I want to take them, because always I have to get them to that deeper level. Right. I went off a little bit on a rant there and a bit on a tangent, but the point remains, right, to take it back to its basics. In your next lesson, if you're worried if your students aren't getting it, or if you want to be really effective, I would recommend choose 2, maybe 3 really key building blocks. And I have to be vague here with building blocks because it's different for every subject, but I believe that this applies for every subject. Figure out what are these things I want students to know. Then formulate a question that's going to hopefully direct students to see the connections between these things. And that can happen in an activity. That's the best lessons, where it's not explained how they connect, but you give them the building blocks, and then you pose a problem and they have to figure out the connection there between them. That's my general metaphor for a good lesson. That's what I try to do every lesson. I go, here are the building blocks. I could show them that in a video, my chalk and talk, read it in a book, combination of all 3. Then I pose a problem with an activity designed around it to go connect those together. And then as the extension, I check that every student can get to the how and why, hopefully in their workbooks. And then the extension is now challenge that. And that's for the critical thinkers. All right, this is why I always come back to content is king. Now, shout out to the person who wrote a comment. Sorry, the name's escaping me right now. You asked a great question. Does this apply to other subjects like PE and art? I welcome someone to try it and challenge it and tell me that it doesn't in my own beliefs. And I honestly haven't applied this to a sport like PE. And I haven't taught it. So I don't want to, I think it does, and I think it will. And when I hypothesize it through in my mind, these 3 levels do apply, because if we're teaching a procedural skill, we have to be able to articulate the points of that skill. I have to be able to say, okay, do this and then this and then this. So I still have, in order to teach it, I have to be able to articulate it. In order for a student to conscientiously and consciously rehearse it, to practice, so they have to know what they're doing. So they have to be able to break it down step by step. And then to be able to perform that action fluently, right, is what we're getting at when we're trying to teach procedural skills like in PE or in art. Then with the creative thinking, critical thinking would be, okay, can I apply that in a new scenario? So for example, basketball is something I know. If I'm teaching how to shoot a free throw, right, I might say, okay, you have to know the fundamentals of shooting a free throw. Bend your knees, elbow straight, eyes on the target, follow through. They are the building blocks. Now, to be able to get students to put that together, they have to consciously know that and see the connection between the goal, what they're trying to do, and understand why those things. Why bend your knees? Why elbow straight? Why follow through? You can't just do it and not question it. So you have to know why those things connect, right? Then the critical thinking would be, wait, do those same reasons why I do this, it works in basketball, would that apply to another sport? Right? Or you could say, does that same action apply to another situation within basketball, right? Bending your knees, following through, making a pass, for example. So that's how that would apply in a motor skill sport. Anyway, everything I do comes back to these 3 levels of learning. I'm amazed that solo taxonomy didn't sweep the floor with blooms and change everything. I'm trying to drip feed it out there in these videos. In the next video, I'll talk about how I use this in my parent-teacher conferences. And I've found that when I show this to parents, they just get it. And I can explain things so easily in my parent-teacher conferences about where their student, where the child is at. Woo! That became a rant. Thank you if you stuck this far through. Brilliant. Awesome. Thanks, and see you on the next one.